Listen, we've all heard the advice that you should be asking employers questions at the end of your interview, but not so fast. In this video, I'm going to share with you why it's actually not a great idea. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you why you should stop asking questions at the end of your interview. And here's what you should do instead. But before we get into that, if you're interested in learning how to reclaim authority and power in your career, especially when it comes to interviewing, make sure you sign up for my free weekly newsletter. And in it, I share concise, actionable tips on how to approach your career with a higher degree of strategy so that you can breeze through those interview processes and unlock higher earning potential. Keep in mind, it's absolutely free. Hope to see you there. So we've all heard this advice. You should be asking these questions in your interview process so that you show a sense of engagement and impress the employer. And I think a lot of people don't really understand why they should be asking questions to begin with. And of course, there's a lot of people searching for what questions should I even be asking in my interview. I actually made another video covering what questions should be asked in the interview. So if you're not sure, you should go and check that video out. It's actually a really helpful resource if you're actively interviewing. So you might even want to hit a bookmark on that one. But why are we supposed to be asking these interview questions anyway? Well, it's helpful to know that there are two different kinds of interview questions that you should be asking. First type of question is a qualifying question, and this is a question that you're asking the employer to assess them. We'll speak more about that in a little bit. The second type of question that we might consider asking is a strategy-based question. And these questions are designed to A, impress the hiring team so that they look at you as somebody that's engaged and asking very smart and intelligent questions. And two, it's also designed for you to pull out information from the employer to then use to your advantage throughout the rest of the interviewing process. But most of us walk into these interviews without any real strategy about why we're asking the questions that we are. But the advice seems pretty universal. And at the end of the interview, the recruiter or the hiring authority or the interviewer is likely going to ask you if you have any questions for them. And this is where the pundits will typically recommend that you wait till the end of the interview and make sure that you've got a series of questions lined up just to show them how interested you are in the role and to hopefully clarify anything for them. And it's not to say that the questions that they're suggesting that you should ask are bad questions. There's actually some pretty good ones in some of the articles that I've read myself, but it's the timing of it that I have an issue with. Because here's the thing. When we get to the end of the interview and I, as the recruiter, ask you if you have any questions for me, I've actually already made up my mind about your candidacy. And the same thing will go for the hiring manager or other people in the interview process. In fact, I would surmise to say we probably have a decision made within the first 10 to 15 minutes of just about any interview. So by waiting until the end of the interview to ask some of the strategic-based questions in particular, it's actually a little too late. And no amount of question asking or probing us to try to impress us with your knowledge is likely going to change that. Therefore, you're better off asking these strategic-based interview questions early into your interview process before we start asking you any behavior-based questions ourselves. This is particularly important for the hiring manager and the panel interviews beyond the recruiter's screen, but nonetheless, any interview I walk into, I'm asking strategic-based questions very early into the interview process. Again, check out the video that I made on 10 questions that you should ask in your interview if you're looking for some suggestions or ideas for things that you can be asking that are more strategy based. Now, as far as timing is concerned, typically in the beginning of the interview, or at least most interviewers will give you a synopsis of either their role or what the job itself entails, and they may ask you if you have any questions about it before they jump into your background. And that's the perfect opportunity to interject and say, actually, I do have a couple questions if you don't mind. And one question I universally ask, whether it's with the recruiter or the hiring manager, is why is this position open to begin with? And the reason why that question is so important is it gives me a lot of context as to why the position is likely even open to begin with, and maybe a little insight into what the hiring manager is likely to be assessing. In other words, if it's a newly created position, I certainly want to know, why was the position created? Is it a certain competency that they don't currently have in their team? Or is the volume of work so high that they're just looking to brute force their way to a solution at the end? And alternatively, if they say that they don't have the right skill set in their group and they're trying to hire to bring that in, think of how valuable that information is as you use it through the rest of your interview process. By asking these questions early in the interview, you can glean a lot of really valuable data that you can use to your advantage. Now, there's also some really common advice that goes around that I just don't think is effective, that you should ask the interviewer at the end, is there anything in my background that might cause you pause for moving me forward in the interview process? And if there is something, I'm probably going, yeah, I've already made up my mind, and you're not likely to be a fit. Again, it's too late to ask that question because now you're backpedaling. At this point, if there is an issue that might cause me to not move you forward, you're now being very defensive in your interviewing and you're trying to backpedal and convince somebody that's already had their mind made up. And trust me, that's a lot harder, and I might even say impossible to do once somebody's already had their first impression of you. It's much better to understand what they're looking for early in the interview process and then make sure that you're the best possible fit for the job based on their expectations. And some people will say, hey, if I ask these questions in the beginning of my interview, the interview teams will get upset with me and they'll think that I'm going to be a pain in the butt. And at the end of the day, if the hiring team, and in particular the hiring manager, gets upset about you asking valid and professional questions about an opportunity that you're really interested in, then that's probably a bigger red flag about them than anything. Furthermore, we're not going to dominate and take over the interview. We're going to ask one or two simple questions with maybe a probing follow-up just to get the right context. So as we move into the interview, again, we want to make sure that we're operating with a degree of strength and strategy here. Now, there are some questions that I would say for the end of the interview, and these would be the qualifying questions. In other words, at some point in the interview, I'm going to be trying to assess the company the same way they're assessing me, because as true free agents or CEOs of our career, we should be making sure that the opportunity makes as much sense for us as it does for them. But the end of the interview, and when I ask you if there are any questions, is the appropriate time to do that. So what are some examples of qualifying questions? Well, this would be your opportunity to get questions around what the work schedule is, maybe what the hours are, maybe where the location, if it's fully remote, if the expectation is hybrid, all of those things. And this might be a great opportunity to ask the interviewer about the culture of the organization or the department, or the manager's leadership style, and maybe what they like best about working there. And remember, not everything is peaches and cream, so don't forget to ask them some things that maybe they would love to see changed or done differently. Now, it's likely at the recruiter phone screen level that you're going to be asked about your salary expectations. I have an entire other video on how to address that question, but I would let your recruiter take the lead on the salary expectations question in the preliminary interview, unless they decide to move you forward in the process and still haven't brought it up. At that point, it would make sense for you to say, I really am appreciative of the opportunity, but in order to make sure that it makes sense for both of us and that we're respecting each other's time, I'd like to address the salary expectation questions before committing to additional steps. And that way you're not putting the cart before the horse, you're letting the employer take the lead on that discussion. However, we have strategy on how we want to answer that question. So I hope that this gives a little context to the YouTube short that I made about this exact topic, and hopefully it gives you a better idea of how to approach asking questions in your interview, because it is absolutely a very important component of your interview strategy. Just keep in mind to stay professional, make sure that you're asking the right questions at the right time, and don't dominate the interview itself. Anyway, if you're in an active interview process and you need a little bit more support to navigate through to ultimately land at that offer, I do have a couple of different options for you. The first one is called the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp, which takes you from job search all the way to job offer and everything in between. We walk through each individual step of a major corporation's hiring processes. I give you tips, techniques on how to ace each round, ultimately land at the offer, and then make sure that you don't leave a single dime on the table. So if you're somebody that struggles with your interviewing and you just don't know how to approach it with authority, it's an excellent course for you. The second option is part of my Essentials collection, which is called the 48-hour interview crash course, and it just focuses on the interviews themselves. So if that's all you need help on, you don't necessarily need help on the other stuff, that's a great course for you. It gives you a lot of great techniques on how to ace your interview in as little as 48 hours. It's also at a lower price point, so it's great for the budget-minded job seeker. Good luck on your interview. Make sure you ask the right questions at the right time, and I'm sure you'll impress and land that offer. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.